Hello everyone, I am back. To prevent myself from getting cold, I have a scarf now. Also, I came prepared with water and ice. So, let me just fill this up real quick so I can drink out of it. Before I start with, I don't even know where I left off, so I will be looking for that too. For now, let's go. Okay, where was I? Page 1. Part 2. There I am. Okay. I've read more than half of this already, so I'm looking forward to finishing this today. I have a test on it today, by the way. I might as well read the rest of it while I can. Okay. Gotta take off those pesky rubber bands from my teeth. All right. Part 2, Chapter 14. Okonkwo was well received by his mother's kinsmen in Mabanta. The old man who received him was his mother's younger brother, who was now the eldest surviving member of that family. His name was Uchendu, and it was he who had received Okonkwo's mother 20 and 10 years before, when she had been brought home from Umofia to be buried with her people. Okonkwo was only a boy then, and Uchendu still remembered him crying the traditional farewell. "Mother, mother, mother is going." That was many years ago. Today Okonkwo was not bringing his mother home to be buried with her people. He was taking his family of 3 wives and their children to seek refuge in his motherland. As soon as Uchendu saw him with his sad and weary company, he guessed what had happened, and asked no questions. It was not until the following day that Okonkwo told him the full story. The old man listened silently to the end, and then said with some relief, "It is a female Ochu." He arranged the requisites, rites, and sacrifices. Okonkwo was given a plot of ground on which to build his compound, and 2 or 3 pieces of land on which to farm during the coming planting season. With help of his mother's kinsmen, he built himself an obi and 3 huts for his wives. He then installed his personal god and the symbols of his departed fathers. Each of Uchendu's 5 sons contributed 300 seed yams to enable their cousin to plant a farm, for as soon as the first rain came, farming would begin. At last the rain came. It was sudden and tremendous. For 2 or 3 moons the sun had been gathering strength till it seemed to breathe a breath of fire on the earth. All the grass had long been scorched down, and the sands felt like live coals to the feet. Evergreen trees wore a dusty coat of brown. The birds were silenced in the forests, and the world lay panting under the live, vibrating heat. And then came the clap of thunder. It was angry, metallic, and thirsty clap, unlike of deep and liquid rumbling of the rainy season. A mighty wind arose and filled the air with dust. Palm trees swayed as the wind combed their leaves into flying crests like strange and fantastic quiver. When the rain finally came, it was in large solid drops of frozen water, which the people called the nuts of the water of heaven. They were hard and painful on the body as they fell, yet young people ran about happily picking up the cold nuts and throwing them into their mouths to melt. The earth quickly came to life, and the birds in the forest fluttered around and chirped merrily. A vague scent of life and green vegetation was diffused in the air. As the rain began to fall more soberly and in small liquid drops, children sought for shelter, and all were happy, refreshed, and thankful. Okonkwo and his family worked very hard to plant a new farm, but it was like beginning life anew without the vigor and enthusiasm of youth, like learning to become left-handed in old age. Work no longer had for him the pleasure it used to have, and when there was no work to do, he sat in a silent half-sleep. His life had been ruled by a great passion, to become one of the lords of the clan. That had been his life spring, and he had all but achieved it. Then everything had been broken. He had been cast out of his clan like fish into a dry sandy beach, panting. Clearly his personal god, or chi, was not made for great things. A man cannot rise beyond the destiny of his chi. The saying of the elders was not true, that if a man said yeah, his chi also affirmed. Here was a man whose chi said nay despite his own affirmation. The old man, Uchendu, saw clearly that Okonkwo had yielded to despair, and he was greatly troubled. He would speak to him after the Isa Ife ceremony. The youngest of Uchendu's 5 sons, Amiku, was marrying a new wife. The bride price had been paid, and all but the last ceremony had been performed. Amiku and his people had taken palm wine to the bride's kinsmen about 2 moons before Okonkwo's arrival in Mabanta. And so it was time for the final ceremony of confession. The daughters of the family were all there, some of them having come a long way from their homes in distant villages. Uchendu's eldest daughter had come from Obado, nearly half a day's journey away. The daughters of Uchendu's brothers were also there. It was a full gathering of Umudada, in the same day as they would meet if a death occurred in the family. There were 22 of them. They sat in a big circle on the ground, and the bride sat in the center with a hen in her right hand. Uchendu sat by her, holding the ancestral staff of the family. All the other men sat outside the circle watching. Their wives watched also. It was evening and the sun was setting. Uchendu's eldest daughter, Nijaida, asked the questions. Remember that if you do not answer truthfully, you will suffer or even die at childbirth, she began. How many men have laid with you since my brother first exposed the desire to marry you? None, she answered simply. Answer truthfully, urged the older woman. None? Asked Nijaida. None, she answered. Swear on this staff of my father's, said Uchendu. I swear, said the bride. Uchendu took the hen from her, slit its throat with a sharp knife, and allowed some of the blood to fall on his ancestral staff. From that day, Amikwu took the young bride to his hut, and she became his wife. The daughters of the family did not return to their homes immediately, but spent 2 or 3 days with their kinsmen. On the second day, Uchendu called together his sons and daughters and his nephew Okonkwo. The men brought their goatskin mats, with which they sat on the floor, and the women sat on a sisal mat spread on a raised bank of earth. Uchendu pulled gently at his gray beard, and he gnashed his teeth. Then he began to speak, quietly and deliberately, picking his words with great care. It is Okonkwo that I primarily wish to speak to, he began. But I want all of you to know what I'm going to say. I am an old man and you are all children. I know more about the world than any of you. If there is anyone among you who thinks he knows more, let him speak up. He paused, but no one spoke. Why is Okonkwo with us today? This is not his clan. We are only his mother's kinsmen. He does not belong here. He is an exile, condemned for 7 years to live in a strange land. And so he is bowed with grief. But there is just one question I would like to ask him. Can you tell me, Okonkwo, why is it that one of the most commonest names we give our children is Neka, or mother is supreme? We all know that a man is the head of a family, and his wives do his bidding. A child belongs to its father and his family, and not to its mother and her family. A man belongs to his fatherland and not to his motherland. And yet we say Neka, mother is supreme. Why is that? There was silence. I want Okonkwo to answer me, said Uchendu. I do not know the answer, Okonkwo replied. You do not know the answer? So you see that you are a child. You have many wives and many children, but more children than I have. You are a great man in your clan, but you are still a child, my child. Listen to me and I shall tell you. But there is one more question I shall ask you. Why is it that when a woman dies, she is taken home to be buried with her own kinsmen? She is not buried with her husband's kinsmen. Why is that? Your mother was brought home to me and buried with my people. Why was that? Okonkwo shook his head. He does not know that either, said Uchendu. Yet he is full of sorrow because he has come to live in his motherland for a few years. He laughed a mirthless laughter and turned to his sons and daughters. What about you? Can you answer my question? They all shook their heads. Then listen to me, he said and cleared his throat. It's true that a child belongs to its father, but when a father beats his child, it seeks sympathy in its mother's hut. A man belongs to his fatherland when things are good and life is sweet. But when there is sorrow and bitterness, he finds refuge in his motherland. Your mother is there to protect you. She is buried there. And that is why we say that mother is supreme. It is right that you, Okonkwo, should bring to your mother a heavy face and refuse to be comforted. Be careful, or you may displease the dead. Your duty is to comfort your wives and children and take them back to your fatherland after 7 years. But if you allow sorrow to weigh down on you and kill you, they will all die in exile. He paused for a while. These are now your kinsmen. He waved at his sons and daughters. You think you are the greatest sufferer in the world? Do you know that men are sometimes banished for life? Do you know that men sometimes lose all their yams and even their children? I had 6 wives once. I have none now except a young girl who knows not her right from her left. Do you know how many children I have buried? Children I begot in my youth and strength? 22. I did not hang myself, and I am still alive. If you think you are the greatest sufferer in the world, ask my daughter, Akenui, how many twins she has borne and thrown away. Have you not heard the song they sing when a woman dies? For whom it is well, for whom it is well, is it well? There is no one for whom it is well. I have no more to say to you. Do something real quick, because apparently I'm doing something and I'm getting messages. But that was the end of chapter 14. Okay. I should turn it this way. Yeah, it's better. Okay. Chapter 15. It was in the second year of Okonkwo's exile that his friend Oberika came to visit him. He brought with him 2 young men, each of them carrying a heavy bag on his head. Okonkwo helped them put down their loads. It was clear that the bags were full of cowries. Okonkwo was very happy to receive his friend. His wives and children were happy too, and so were his cousins and their wives when he sent for them and told them who his guest was. You must take him to salute our father, said one of the cousins. Yes, replied Okonkwo, we are going directly. But before they went, he whispered something to his first wife. She nodded, and soon the children were chasing one of their cocks. Uchendu had been told by one of his grandchildren that the 3 strangers had come to Okonkwo's house. He was therefore waiting to receive them. He held out his hands to them when they came into his obi, and after they had shaken hands, he asked Okonkwo who they were. There is Oberika, my great friend. I have already spoken to you about him. Yes, said the old man, turning to Oberika. My son has told me about you, and I am happy you have come to see us. I knew your father, Iwika. He was a great man. He had many friends here and came to see them quite often. Those were good days when the man had friends in distant clans. Your generation does not know that. You stay at home, afraid of your next-door neighbor. Even a man's motherland is strange to him nowadays. He looked at Okonkwo. I am an old man, and I would like to talk. That is all I'm good for now. He got up painfully and went into an inner room and came back with a kola nut. Okonkwo is a sound effect. Maybe. Who are the young men with you? He asked as he sat down again on his goatskin. Okonkwo told him. Ah, he said, welcome, my sons. He presented the kola nut to them, and when they had seen it and thanked him, he broke it and they ate. Go into that room, he said to Okonkwo, pointing with his finger. You will find a pot of wine there. Okonkwo bought the wine, and they began to drink. It was a day old and very strong. Yes, said Uchendu after a long silence. People traveled more in those days. There is not a single clan in these parts that I do not know very well. Aninta, Umuazu, Ikocha, Alumelu, Abame. I know them all. Have you heard, asked Oberika, that Abame is no more? How is that, Uchendu and Okonkwo together? Abame has been wiped out, said Oberika. It is a strange and terrible story. If I had not seen the few survivors with my own eyes and heard their story with my own ears, I would not have believed. Was it not on Ikide that they fled to Umofia? He asked his 2 companions, and they nodded their heads. 3 moons ago, said Oberika, on an Iki market day, a little band of fugitives came into our town. Most of them were sons of our land whose mothers had been buried with us. But there were some too who came because they had friends in our town, and others who could think of nowhere else open to escape. And so they fled to Eumolpia with a woeful story. He drank his palm wine, and Okonkwo filled his horn again. He continued, during the last planting season, a white man had appeared in their clan. An albino, suggested Okonkwo. He was not an albino. He was quite different. He sipped his wine. And he was riding an iron horse. The first people who saw him ran away, but he stood beckoning to them. In the end, the fearless ones then went near and even touched him. The elders consulted their oracle and told them that it was a strange man to break their clan and spread destruction among them. Obirika again drank a little of his wine. And so they killed the white man and tied his iron horse to their sacred tree because it looked as if they would run away to call the other man's friends. I forgot to tell you another thing which the oracle said. It said that other white men were on their way. They were locusts, it said, and that first man was their harbinger sent to explore the terrain, and so they killed him. What did the white man say before they killed him? Asked Uchendu. He said nothing, answered one of Obirika's companions. He said something, only they did not understand him, said Obirika. He seemed to speak through his nose. One of the men told me, said Obirika's other companion, that he repeated over and over again a word that resembled Mbeno. Perhaps he had been going to Mbeno and had lost his way. Anyway, resumed Obirika, they killed him and tied up his iron horse. This was before the planting season began. For a long time nothing happened. The rains had come and yams had been sown. The iron horse was still tied to the sacred silk cotton tree. And then one morning 3 white men led by a band of ordinary men like us came to the clan. They saw the iron horse and went away again. Most of the men and women of the Abame had gone to their farms. Only a few of them saw these white men and their followers. For many market weeks, nothing else happened. They have a big market in Abame on every other Afro day, and as you know, the whole clan gathers there. That was the day it happened. The 3 white men and a very large number of other men surrounded the market. They must have used a very powerful medicine to make themselves invisible until the market was full. And they began to shoot. Everybody was killed, except the old and the sick, who were at home, and a handful of men and women whose chi were wide awake and brought them out of the market. He paused. Their clan is now completely empty. Even the sacred fish in their mysterious lake have fled, and the lake has turned the color of blood. A great evil has come upon their land, as the oracle had warned. There was a long silence. Uchendu ground his teeth together audibly. Then he burst out. Never kill a man who says nothing. Those men of Abami were fools. What do they know about the man? He ground his teeth again and told the story to illustrate his point. Mother Kite once sent her daughter to bring food. She went and brought back a duckling. You have done very well, said Mother Kite to her daughter. But tell me, what did the mother of this duckling say when you swooped and carried its shell away? It said nothing, replied the young kite. It just walked away. You must return the duckling, said Mother Kite. There is something ominous behind the silence. And so daughter Kite returned the duckling and took a chick instead. What did the mother of the chick do? Asked the old kite. It cried and raved and cursed me, said the young kite. Then we can eat the chick, said her mother. There is nothing to fear for someone who shouts. Those men of Abame were fools. They were fools, said Okonkwo after a pause. They had been warned that danger was ahead. They should have armed themselves with their gun and their machetes even when they went to the market. They have paid for their foolishness, asked Obirika, but I am greatly afraid. We have heard stories about white men who made the powerful guns and the strong drinks and took slaves away from across the seas, but no one thought the stories were true. There is no story that is not true, said Uchendu. The world has no end, and what is good among people is an abomination with others. We have albinos among us. Do you not think that they came to our clan by mistake, that they have strayed from their way to a land where everybody is like them? Okonkwo's first wife soon finished her cooking and set before their guests a big meal of pounded yams and bitter leaf soup. Okonkwo's son, Noye, brought in a pot of sweet wine tapped from a raffia palm. You are a big man now, Obirika said to Noye. Your friend Anini is asked me to greet you. Is he well? Asked Noye. We are all well, said Obirika. And Zima brought them a bowl of water with which to wash their hands. After that, they began to eat and to drink their wine. When did you set out from home? Asked Okonkwo. We had meant to set out from my house before cockcrow, said Obirika, but Nweka did not appear until it was quite light. Never make an early morning appointment with a man who had just married a new wife. They all laughed. Has Noika married a wife? Asked Okonkwo. He has married Okadigbo's second daughter, said Obarika. That is very good, said Okonkwo. I do not blame you for hearing the cock crow. When they had eaten, Obarika pointed at the two heavy bags. That is the money from your yams, he said. I sold the big ones as soon as you left. Later on, I sold one of the seed yams and gave out others to sharecroppers. I shall do that every year until you return. But I thought you would need the money now, and so I brought it. Who knows what may happen tomorrow? Perhaps green men will come to our clan and shoot us. God will not permit it, said Okonkwo. I do not know how to thank you. I can tell you, said Obairika. Kill one of your sons for me. That will not be enough, said Okonkwo. Then kill me yourself, said Obairika. Forgive me, said Okonkwo, smiling. I shall not talk about thanking you any more. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16. When nearly 2 years later Obairika paid another visit to his friend in exile, the circumstances were less happy. The missionaries had come to Umofia. They had built their church there, won a handful of converts, and were already sending evangelists to the surrounding towns and villages. That was a source of great sorrow to the leaders of the clan, but many of them believed that the strange faith in the white man's God would not last. None of his converts was a man whose word is heeded in the assembly of the people. None of them was a man of title. They were mostly the kind of people that were called efulefu, worthless, empty men. The imagery of an efulefu in the language of the clan was a man who sold his machete and wore the sheath to battle. Shiloh, the priestess of Agbala, called the converts with the excrement of the clan, and the new faith was a mad dog that had come to eat it up. What moved Obairika to visit Okonkwo was the sudden appearance of the latter's son, Nwoye, among the missionaries of Umofia. What are you doing here? Obairika had asked, when after many difficulties the missionaries had allowed him to speak to the boy. I'm one of them, replied Nwoye. How is your father? Obairika asked, not knowing what else to say. I don't know. He is not my father, said Nwoye unhappily. And so Obairika went to Mbabanta to see his friend, and he found that Okonkwo did not wish to speak about Nwoye. It was only from Nwoye's mother that he heard scraps of the story. The arrival of the missionaries had caused a considerable stir in the village of Mbabanta. There were 6 of them, and one was a white man. Every man and woman came out to see the white man. Stories about these strange men had grown since one of them had been killed in Agame, and his iron horse tied to the sacred silk cotton tree. And so everybody came to see the white man. It was a time of the year when everybody was at home. The harvest was over. When they had all gathered, the white man began to speak to them. He spoke through an interpreter who was an Igbo man, though his dialect was different and harsh to the ears of Mbanta. Many people laughed at his dialect and the way he used words strangely. Instead of saying myself, he always said my buttocks. But he was a man of commanding presence, and the clansmen listened to him. He said he was one of them, and they could see from his color and his language. The other 4 black men were also their brothers, although one of them did not speak Igbo. The white man was also their brother because they were all sons of God, and he told them about his new God, the creator of all the world and all the men and women. He told them that they worshipped false gods of wood and stone. A deep murmur went through the crowd when he said this. He told them that the true God lived on high, and that all men, when they died, went before him for judgment. Evil men and all the heathen who, in their blindness, bowed to wood and stone, were thrown into a fire that burned like palm oil. But good men who worshipped the true God lived forever in his happy kingdom. We have been sent by this great God to ask you to leave your wicked ways and false gods and turn to him, so that you may be saved when you die, he said. Your buttocks understand our language, said someone lightheartedly, and the crowd laughed. What did he say? The white man asked his interpreter. But before he could answer, another man asked a question. Where is the white man's horse? He asked. The Ibo evangelists consulted among themselves and decided that the man probably meant bicycle. They told the white man, and he smiled benevolently. Tell them, he said, that I shall bring many iron horses when we have settled down among them. Some of them will even ride the iron horse themselves. This was interpreted to them, but very few of them heard. They were talking excitedly among themselves because the white man had said he was going to live among them. They had not thought about that. At this point, an old man said he had a question. Which is this God of yours? He asked. The goddess of the earth, the god of the sky, Amadiora, or the thunderbolt, or what? The interpreter spoke to the white man, and he immediately gave his answer. All the gods you have named are not gods at all. They are gods of deceit who tell you to kill your fellows and destroy innocent children. There is only one true God, he has the earth, the sky, you and me, and all of us. If we leave our gods and follow your God, asked another man, who will protect us from the anger of our neglected gods and ancestors? Your gods are not alive and cannot do you any harm, replied the white man. They are pieces of wood and stone. When this was interpreted to the men of Mabanta, they broke into derisive laughter. These men must be mad, they said to themselves. How else could they say that Ani and Amiadora were harmless, and Idamili and Agugu too? And some of them began to go away. Then the missionaries burst into song. It was one of those gay and rollicking tunes of evangelism which had the power of plucking at silent and dusty chords in the heart of an able man. The interpreter explained each verse to the audience, some of whom now stood enthralled. It was the story of brothers who lived in darkness and fear, ignorant of the love of God. It told of one sheep out in the hills, away from the gates of God and from the tender shepherd's care. After the singing, the interpreter spoke about the Son of God, whose name was Jesu Christi. Okonkwo, who only stayed in the hope that it might come to chasing the men out of the village or whipping them, now said, You told us with your own mouth that there was only one God. Now you talk about his son. He must have a wife then. The crowd agreed. I did not say he had a wife, said the interpreter somewhat lamely. Your buttock said he had a son, said the joker, so he must have a wife and all of them must have buttocks. The missionary ignored him and went on to talk about the Holy Trinity. At the end of it, Okonkwo was fully convinced that the man was mad. He shrugged his shoulders and went away to tap his afternoon palm wine. But there was a young lad who had been captivated. His name was Noye, Okonkwo's first son. It was not the mad logic of the Trinity that captivated him. He did not understand it. It was the poetry of the new religion, something felt in the marrow. The hymn about brothers who sat in darkness and in fear seemed to answer a vague and persistent question that haunted his young soul. The question of the twins crying in the bush and the question of Ikemefuna who was killed. He felt a relief within as the hymn poured into his parched soul. The words of the hymn were like the drops of frozen rain melting on the dry palate of the panting earth. Noye's callow mind was greatly puzzled. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17. The missionaries spent their first 4 or 5 nights in the marketplace, and they went on into the villages in the morning to preach the gospel. They asked who the king of the village was, but the villagers told them that there was no king. We have men of high title and the chief priests and the elders, they said. It was not very easy getting the men of high title and the elders together after the excitement of the first day, but the missionaries persevered, and in the end they were received by the rulers of Mabanta. They asked for a plot of land to build their church. Every clan and village had its evil forest. In it were buried all of those who died of really evil diseases, like leprosy and smallpox. It was also the dumping ground for the potent fetishes of the great medicine men when they died. An evil forest was, therefore, alive with sinister forces and powers of darkness. It was such a force that the rulers of Mata gave to the missionaries. They did not really want them in their clan, and so they made them that offer in which no one in his right senses would accept. They want a piece of land to build their shrine, said Uchende to his peers when they consulted amongst themselves. We shall give them a piece of land. He paused, and there was a murmur of surprising disagreement. Let us give them a portion of the evil forest. They boast about victory over death. Let us give them a real battlefield in which to show their victory. They laughed and agreed, and sent for the missionaries whom they had asked to leave them for a while so that they might whisper together. They offered them as much of the evil forest as they cared to take, and to their greatest amazement, the missionaries thanked them and burst into song. They do not understand, said some of the elders, but they will understand when they go to their plot of land tomorrow morning, and they dispersed. The next morning, the crazy men actually began to clear a part of the forest and to build their house. The inhabitants of Mbanta expected them all to be dead within 4 days. The first day passed, and the second and third and fourth, and none of them died. Everyone was puzzled, and then it became known that the white man's fetish had unbelievable power. It was said that he wore glasses on his eyes so that he could see and talk to evil spirits. Not long after, he won his first 3 converts. Although Noya had been attracted to the new faith from the very first day, he kept it secret. He dared not go too near the missionaries for fear of his father. But whenever they came to preach in the open marketplace or the village playground, Noya was there, and he was already beginning to know some of the simple stories they told. We have now built a church, said Mr. Kiaga, the interpreter, who was now in charge of the infant congregation. The white man had gone back to Umofia, where he built his headquarters and from where he paid regular visits to Mr. Kiaga's congregation at Mbanta. We have now built a church, said Mr. Kiaga, and we want you all to come in every 7th day to worship the true God. On the following Sunday, Noya passed and repassed the little red earth and thatch building without summoning enough courage to enter. He heard the voice of singing, and although it came from a handful of men, it was loud and confident. Their church stood on a circular clearing that looked like the open mouth of the evil forest. Was it waiting to snap its teeth together? After passing and repassing by the church, Noya returned home. It was well known among the people of Manta that their gods and ancestors were sometimes long-suffering and would deliberately allow a man to go on defining them. But even in such cases, they set their limit at 7 market weeks or 28 days. Beyond that limit, no man was suffered to go. And so excitement mounted in the village as the 7th week approached since the impudent missionaries built their church in the evil forest. The villagers were so certain about the doom that awaited these men that 1 or 2 converts thought it wise to suspend their allegiance to the new faith. At last the day came by which all the missionaries should have died. But they were still alive, building a new red earth and thatch house for their teacher, Mr. Kiaga. That week, they won a handful of more converts, and for the first time they had a woman. Her name was Neka, the wife of Imadi, who was a prosperous farmer. She was very heavy with child. Neka had 4 previous pregnancies and childbirths, but each time she had born twins, and they had been immediately thrown away. Her husband and his family were already becoming highly critical of such a woman and were not unduly perturbed when they found she had fled to join the Christians. It was good riddance. One morning, Okonko's cousin, Amiku, was passing by the church on his way from the neighboring village. When he saw Nwoye among the Christians, he was greatly surprised, and when he got home, he went straight to Okonko's hut and told him what he had seen. The women began to talk steadily, but Okonko sat unmoved. It was late afternoon before Nwoye returned. He went into the obi and saluted his father, but he did not answer. Nwoye turned around to walk into the inner compound when his father, suddenly overcome with fear, sprang to his feet and gripped him by the neck. "Where have you been?" he stammered. Nwoye struggled to free himself from the choking grip. "Answer me," roared Okonkwo, "before I kill you." He seized a heavy stick that lay on the dwarf wall and hit him 2 or 3 savage blows. "Answer me," he roared again. Nwoye stood looking at him and did not say a word. The women were screaming outside, afraid to go in. "Leave that boy at once," said a voice in the outer compound. It was Okonkwo's uncle, Uchendu. Are you mad? Okonkwo did not answer, but he left hold of Noye, who walked away and never returned. He went back to the church and told Mr. Kiaga that he had decided to go to Umofia, where the white missionary had set up a school to teach young Christians to read and write. Mr. Kiaga's joy was very great. Blessed is he who forsakes his father and mother for my sake, he intoned. Those that hear my words are my father and my mother. Noya did not fully understand, but he was happy to leave his father, and he would return later to his mother and his brothers and sisters and convert them to the new faith. As Okonkwo sat in his hut that night, gazing into a log fire, he thought over the matter. A sudden fury rose within him, and he felt a strong desire to wake up his machete, go to the church and wipe out the entire vile and miscreant gang. But on further thought, he told himself that Nwoye was not worth fighting for. Why, he cried in his heart, should he, Okonkwo, of all people, be cursed with such a son? He saw clearly in it the finger of his personal god or chief. For how else could he explain his great misfortune and exile and how his despicable son's behavior? Now that he had time to think of it, his son's crime stood out in its stark enormity. To abandon the gods of one's father and go about with a lot of effeminate men clucking like old hens was the very depth of abomination. Suppose when he had died, all his male children decided to follow Noya's steps and abandon their ancestors? Okonkwo felt a cold shudder run through him at the terrible prospect, like the prospect of annihilation. He saw himself and his fathers crowding round their ancestral shrine, waiting in vain for worship and sacrificing, finding nothing but ashes of bygone days. And his children, though while praying to the white man's god, if such a thing were ever to happen, he, Okonkwo, would wipe them off the face of the earth. Okonkwo was popularly called the Roaring Flame. As he looked into the log fire, he recalled the name. He was a flaming fire. How then could he have begotten a son like Nwoye, degenerate and effeminate? Perhaps he was not his son. No, he could not be. His wife had played him false. He would teach her. But Nwoye resembled his grandfather, Unoka, who was Okonkwo's father. He pushed the thought out of his mind. He, Okonkwo, was called a flaming fire. How could he have begotten a woman for a son? At Nwoye's age, Okonkwo had already become famous throughout Umofia for his wrestling and his fearlessness. He sighed heavily, and as if in sympathy, the smoldering log also sighed. And immediately Okonkwo's eyes were open, and he saw the whole matter clearly. Living fire begets cold and potent ash. He sighed again deeply. End of chapter 17. One more minute of break before I continue chapter 18. Oh, so that's interesting. Part 2 is basically when the Europeans start arriving into this little village. Interesting. Pretty interesting story so far. Part 1 was a bit slow, but I don't mind. I guess you really gotta make sure the audience knows who these people are. Chapter 18. The young church in Mabanta had a few crises early in its life. At first, the clan had assumed that it would not survive, but it had gone on living and gradually becoming stronger. The clan was worried, but not overmuch. If a gang of Afulefu decided to live in the evil forest, it was their own affair. When one came to think of it, the evil forest was a fit home for such undesirable people. It was true that they were rescuing twins from the bush, but they never brought them into the village. As far as the villagers were concerned, the twins still remained where they had been thrown away. Surely the earth goddess would not visit the sins of the missionaries on the innocent villagers? But on one occasion, the missionaries had tried to overstep the bounds. Three converts had gone to the village and boasted openly that all the gods were dead and impotent, and that they were prepared to defy them by burning all their shrines. "Go and burn your mother's genitals," said one of the priests. The men were seized and beaten until they streamed with blood. After that, nothing happened for a long time between the church and the clan. But stories were already gaining ground that the white man had not only brought a religion, but also a government. It was said that they had built a place of judgment in Umofia to protect the followers with their religion. It was even said that they had hanged one man who killed a missionary. Although such stories were now often told, they looked like fairy tales in Mbanta and did not as yet affect the relationship between the new church and the clan. There was no question of killing a missionary here, for Mr. Kiaga, despite his madness, was quite harmless. As for his converts, no one could kill them without having to flee from the clan. For in spite of their worthlessness, they still belonged to the clan. And so no one gave serious thought to the stories about the white man's government or the consequences of killing the Christians. If they became more troublesome than they already were, they would simply be driven out of the clan. And the little church was at that moment too deeply absorbed in its own troubles to annoy the clan. It all began over the question of admitting outcasts. These outcasts, or Osu, seeing that the new religion welcomed twins in such abominations, thought that it was possible that they would also be received. And so one Sunday, two of them went into the church. There was an immediate stir, but so great was the work of the new religion had done among the converts that they did not immediately leave the church when the outcasts came in. Those who found themselves nearest to them merely moved to another seat. It was a miracle, but it only lasted until the end of the service. The whole church raised a protest and was about to drive these people out when Mr. Kiaka stopped them and began to explain. "Before God," he said, "there is no slave or free. We are all children of God, and we must receive these our brothers." "I agree." Cat piss. "You do not understand," said one of the converts. "What will the heathen say of us when they hear that we received Osu in our midst? They will laugh." "Let them laugh," said Mr. Kyaga. "God will laugh at them on Judgment Day. Why do the nations rage and the people imagine a vain thing? He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. "You do not understand," the convert maintained. "You are our teacher, and you cannot teach us. You can teach the things of the new faith. But this is a matter which we know." And he told him what an Osu was. He was a person dedicated to a god, a thing set apart, a taboo forever, and his children after him. He can neither marry nor be married by the freeborn. He was in fact an outcast, living in a special area of the village, close to the great shrine. Whenever he went, he carried with him the mark of his forbidden caste, long tangled and dirty hair. A razor was taboo to him. An Osu cannot attend an assembly of the freeborn, and they, in turn, cannot shelter under his roof. He cannot take any of the 4 titles of the clan, and when he died, he was buried by his kind in the evil forest. How could such a man be a follower of Christ? He needs Christ more than you and I," said Mr. Kyaga. "Then I shall go back to the clan," said the convert, and he went. Mr. Kyaga stood firm, and it was his firmness that saved the young church. The wavering converts drew inspiration and confidence from his unshakable faith. He ordered the outcasts to shave off their long, tangled hair. At first, they were afraid they might die. Unless you shave off the mark of your heathen belief, I will not admit you into the church, said Mr. Kyaga. You fear that you will die. But why should that be? How are you different from the other men who shave their hair? The same God created you and them, but they have cast you out like lepers. It is against the will of God, who has promised everlasting life to all who believe in his holy name. The heathens say you will die if you do this or that, and you are afraid. They also said I would die if I built my church on this ground. Am I dead? They said I would die if I took care of the twins. I am still alive. The heathens speak nothing but falsehood. Only the word of our God is true. The two outcasts shaved their hair, and soon they were the strongest adherents of the new faith. And what was more, nearly all of the Osu and Banta followed their example. It was in fact one of them who in his zeal brought the church into serious conflict with the clan a year later by killing the sacred python, the emanation of the god of water. The royal python was the most revered animal in Mabanta and all the surrounding clans. It was addressed as our father and was allowed to go wherever it chose, even into people's beds. It ate rats in the house and sometimes swallowed hens' eggs. If a clansman killed a royal python accidentally, he made sacrifices of atonement and performed an expensive burial ceremony such as was done for a great man. No punishment was prescribed for a man who killed a python knowingly. Nobody thought that such a thing could ever happen. Perhaps it never did happen. That was the way the clan at first looked at it. No one had actually seen the man do it. The story had arisen among the Christians themselves. But all the same, the rulers and elders of Mbanta assembled to decide on their action. Many of them spoke at great length and in fury. The spirit of wars was upon them. Okonkwo, who had begun to play a part in the affairs of his motherland, said that until the abominable gang was chased out of the village with whips, there would be no peace. But there were many others who saw the situation differently, and it was their counsel that prevailed in the end. It is not our custom to fight for our gods, said one of them. Let us not presume to do so now. If a man kills the sacred python in the secrecy of his hut, the matter lies between him and the god. We do not see it. If we put ourselves between the god and his victim, we may receive blows intended for the offender. When a man blasphemes, what do we do? Do we go and stop his mouth? No. We put our fingers into our ears and stop his hearing. That is a wise action. Let us not reason like cowards, said Okonkwo. If a man comes into my hut and defecates on the floor, what do? Do I shut my eyes? No. I take a stick and break his head. That is what a man does. These people are daily pouring filth over us, and Okeke says that we should pretend not to see. Okonkwo made a sound full of disgust. This was a womanly clan, he thought. Such a thing can never happen in his fatherland, Umuofia. Okonkwo has spoken the truth, said another man. We should do something, but let us ostracize these men. We would then not be held accountable for their abominations. Everybody in the assembly spoke, and in the end it was decided to ostracize the Christians. Okonkwo ground his teeth in disgust. That night, a bellman went through the length and breadth of Mbanta, proclaiming that the adherents of the new faith were thenceforth excluded from the life and privileges of the clan. The Christians had grown in numbers and were now a small community of men, women, and children, self-assured and confident. Mr. Brown, the white missionary, paid regular visits to them. When I think that it is only 18 months since the seed was first sown among you, he said, I marvel at what the Lord hath wrought. It was Wednesday in Holy Week, and Mr. Kyaga had asked the women to bring red earth and the white chalk and water to scrub the earth for Easter. And the women had formed themselves into three groups for his purpose. They set out early that morning, some of them with their water pots to the stream, another group with hoes and baskets to the village red earth pit, and the others to the chalk quarry. Mr. Kyaga was praying in the church when he heard the women talking excitedly. He rounded off his prayer and went to see what it was about. The women had come to his church with empty water pots. They said that some young men had chased them away from the stream with whips. Soon after, the woman who had gone for the red earth returned with empty baskets. Some of them had been heavily whipped. The chalk woman also returned to tell a similar story. What does it all mean? Asked Mr. Kyaga, who was greatly perplexed. The village has outlawed us, said one of the women. The bellman announced it last night. It is not our custom to debar anyone from the stream or the quarry. Another woman said, they want to ruin us. They will not allow us into the markets. They have said so. Mr. Kyaga was going to send into the villager for his men converts when he saw them coming on their own. Of course, they had all heard the bellman, but they had never in all their lives heard the woman being debarred from the stream. Come along, they said to the woman. We will go with you to meet those cowards. Some of them had big sticks and some even machetes. But Mr. Kyaga restrained them. He wanted first to know why they had been outlawed. They say that Okoli killed the sacred python, said one man. It is false, said another. Okoli told me himself that it was false. Okoli was not there to answer. He had fallen ill on the previous night, before the day was over and he was dead. His death showed that the gods were still able to fight their own battles. The clan saw no reason then for molesting the Christians. Wow. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19. The last big rains of the year were falling. It was the time for treading red earth with which to build walls. It was not done earlier because the rains were too heavy and would have washed away the heap of the trodden earth. And it cannot be done later because harvesting would soon set in. And after that, the dry season. It was going to be Okonkwo's last harvest in Mabanta. The 7 wasted and weary years were at last dragging to a close. Although he had prospered in his motherland, Okonkwo knew that he would have prospered even more in Umofia, in the land of his fathers where men were bold and warlike. In these 7 years he would have climbed to his utmost heights. And so he regretted every day of his exile. His mother's kinsmen had been very kind to him, and he was grateful, but that did not alter the facts. He had called the first child born to him in exile Neka, Mother is Supreme, out of politeness to his mother's kinsmen. But 2 years later, when a son was born, he called him Nuofia, begotten in the wilderness. As soon as he entered the last year in exile, Okonkwo sent money to Obairika to build him 2 huts in his old compound, where he and his family would live until he built more huts in the outside wall of his compound. He cannot ask another man to build his own obi for him, nor the walls of his compound. Those things a man built for himself or inherited from his father. At last the heavy rains of the year began to fall. Obairika sent word that the 2 huts had been built, and Okonkwo began to prepare for his return after the rains. He would have liked to return earlier and build his compound that year before the rain stopped, but in doing so he would have taken something from the full penalty of 7 years. And that cannot be. So he waited impatiently for the dry season to come. It came slowly. The rain became lighter and lighter until it fell in slanting showers. Sometimes the sun shone through the rain and a light breeze blew. It was a gay and airy kind of rain. The rainbow began to appear, and sometimes 2 rainbows, like a mother and her daughter, the one young and beautiful, and the other an old and faint shadow. The rainbow was called the Python of the Sky. Okonkwo called his 3 wives and told them to get things together for a great feast. I must thank my mother's kinsmen before I go, he said. Ekwefi still had some kavassa left on her farm from the previous year. Neither of the other wives had. It was not that they had been lazy, but that they had many children to feed. It was therefore understood that Ekwefi would provide cassava for the feast. Noi's mother and Ojiwo would provide the other things like smoked fish, palm oil, and pepper for the soup. Okonkwo would take care of the meat and yams. Ekwefi rose early on the following morning and went to her farm with her daughter Enzima. and Ogiogu, Ogiugo's daughter, Ogiabeli, Obiageli, to harvest cassava tubers. Each of them carried a long cane basket, a machete for cutting down the soft cassava stem, and a little hoe for digging out the tuber. Fortunately, a light rain had fallen during the night, and the soil would not be very hard. It will not take us long to harvest as much as we like, said Akwefi. But the leaves will be wet, said Nzima. Her basket was balanced on her head, and her arms folded across her breasts. She felt cold. I disliked cold water dropping on my back. We should have waited for the sun to rise and dry the leaves. Obiageli called her soft because she said that she disliked water. Are you afraid you may dissolve? The harvesting was easy. As Akwefi had said, the Nzima shook every tree violently with a long stick before she bent down to cut the stem and dig out the tuber. Sometimes it was not necessary to dig. They just pulled the stump, and earth rose, roots snapped below, and the tuber was pulled out. When they had harvested a sizable heap, they had carried it down in two strips into the stream, where every woman had a shallow well for fermenting her cassava. It should be ready in 4 days or even 3, said Obiageli. They are young tubers. They are not all that young, said Akwefi. I planted the farm nearly 2 years ago. It is a poor soil, and that is why the tubers are so small. Okonkwo never did things by halves. When his first wife Akwefi protested that 2 goats were sufficient for the feast, he told her that it was not her affair. I am calling a feast because I have the wherewithal. I cannot live on the bank of a river and wash my hands with spittle. My mother's people have been good to me, and I must show my gratitude. And so 3 goats were slaughtered and a number of fowls. It was like a wedding feast. There was a foo-foo and yam pottage, a goosey soup and bitter leaf soup, and pots of palm wine. All the Umuna were invited to the feast, all the descendants of Okolo who had lived about 200 years before. The oldest member of this extensive family was Okonkwo's uncle, Uchendu. The kola nut was given him to break, and he prayed to the ancestors. He asked them for health and children. We do not ask for wealth because he that has children and health will also have wealth. We do not pray to have more money, but have more kinsmen. We are better than animals because we have kinsmen. An animal rubs its itching flank against a tree, and a man asks his kinsman to scratch him. He prayed especially for Okonkwo and his family. He then broke the kola nut and threw one of his lobes on the ground for his ancestors. As the kola nuts were passed around, Okonkwo's wives and children and those who came to help them with the cooking began to bring out the food. His sons brought out the pots of palm wine. There was so much food and drink that many kinsmen whistled in surprise. When it was all laid out, Okonkwo rose to speak. I beg you to accept this little kola, he said. It is not to pay you back for all you did for me in these 7 years. A child cannot pay for its mother's milk. I have only called you together because it is good for kinsmen to meet. Yam pottage was served first because it was lighter than foo-foo, and yams always came first. Then the foo-foo was served. Some kinsmen ate it with a goosey soup, and others with bitter leaf soup. The meat that was then shared and every member of the Umuna had a portion. Every man arose in order of years and took a share. Even the few kinsmen who had not been able to come had their shares taken out for them in due turn. As the palm wine was drunk, one of the oldest members of the Umuna rose to thank Okonkwo. If I say that we did not expect such a big feast, I will be suggesting that we did not know how open-handed our son, Okonkwo, is. We all know him, and we expected a big feast, but it turned out to be even bigger than we expected. Thank you. May all you took out return again tenfold. It is good in these days when the younger generation consider themselves wiser than their sires to see a man doing things in the grand, old way. A man who calls his kinsmen to a feast does not do so to save them from starving. They all have food in their own homes. When we gather together in the moonlit village ground, it is not because of the moon. Every man can see it in his own compound. We come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so. You may ask why I am still saying all this. I say it because I fear for the younger generation, for you people. He waved, he waved his arm where most of the young men sat. As for me, I have only a short while to live, and so have Uchendu and Unachuku and Nemefo. But I fear for you young people, because you do not understand how strong is the bond of kinship. You do not know what it is to speak with one voice. And what is the result? An abominable religion has settled among you. A man can now leave his father and his brothers. He can curse the gods of his fathers and his ancestors like a hunter's dog that suddenly goes mad and turns on his master. I fear for you. I fear for the clan. He turned again to Okonkwo and said, "Thank you for calling all of us together." End of chapter 19 and end of part 2. That was interesting. I'm guessing part 3, which is what's left of the book, is going to be about how it all comes together. I think the Europeans or the Christians are going to like. I'm expecting something like mass genocide or something. I have no idea, but like, yeah, I'm surprised. Part 1 took me like 4 hours almost to read. Part 2, 1 hour. I think part 3 is shorter. We'll see. Part 3, chapter 20. 7 years ago, 7 years was a long time to be away from one's clan. A man's place was not always there, waiting for him. As soon as he left, someone else rose and filled it. The clan was like a lizard. If it lost its tail and soon grew another. Okonkwo knew these things. He knew that he had lost his place among the 9 masked spirits who administered justice in the clan. He had lost his chance to lead his warlike clan against the new religion, which, he was told, had gained ground. He had lost the years in which he might have taken his highest titles in the clan, but some of these losses were not irreparable. He was determined that his return should soon be marked by his people. He would return with a flourish and regain the 7 wasted years. Even in his first year in exile, he had begun to plan for his return. The first thing he would do would be to rebuild his compound on a more magnificent scale. He would build a bigger barn than he had before, and would build huts for 2 new wives. Then he would show his wealth by initiating his sons into the Ozo society. Only the really great men in the clan were able to do this. Okonkwo saw clearly the high esteem in which he would be held, and he saw himself taking the highest title in the land. As the years of exile passed one by one, it seemed to him that his chi might now be making amends for the past disaster. His yams grew abundantly, not only in his motherland, but also in Umofia, where his friend gave them out year by year to sharecroppers. Then the tragedy of his first son had occurred. At first it appeared as if it might prove too great for his spirit, but it was a resilient spirit, and in the end Okonkwo overcame his sorrow. He had 5 other sons, and he would bring them up in the way of the clan. He sent for the 5 sons, and they came and sat in his obi. The youngest of them was 4 years old. Now you have all seen the great abomination of your brother. Now he is no longer my son or your brother. I will only have a son who is a man, who will hold his head up among the people. If any of you prefers to be a woman, let him follow Noya now while I am alive, so that I can curse him. If you turn against me when I am dead, I will visit you and break your neck. Okonkwo was very lucky in his daughters. He never stopped regretting that Enzima was a girl. Of all his children, she alone understood his every mood. A bond of sympathy had grown between them as the years had passed. Enzima grew up in her father's exile and became one of the most beautiful girls in Mabanta. She was called the Crystal of Beauty, as her mother had been called in her youth. The young alien girl who had caused her mother so much heartache had been transformed almost overnight into a healthy, buoyant maiden. She had, it was true, her moments of depression when she would snap at everybody like an angry dog. These moods descended on her suddenly and for no apparent reason. But they were very rare and short-lived. As long as they lasted, she could bear no other person but her father. Many young men and prosperous middle-aged men of Mvanta came to marry her, but she refused them all because her father had called her one evening and said to her, "There are many good and prosperous people here, but I shall be happy if you marry in Eumolpia when we return home." That was all he had said, but Enzima had seen clearly all the thought and hidden meaning behind the few words, and she had agreed. "Your half-sister, Obiageli, will not understand me," Okonkwo said, "but you can explain to her." Although they were almost the same age, Enzima wielded a strong influence over her half-sister. She explained to her why they should not marry yet, and she agreed also. And so the two of them refused every other offer of marriage in Mabanta. "I wish she were a boy," Okonkwo thought within himself. She understood things so perfectly. Who else among his children would have read his thoughts so well? With two beautiful grown-up daughters, his return to Eumolpia would attract considerable attention. His future sons-in-law would be men of authority in the clan. The poor and unknown would not dare to come forth. Eumolpia had indeed changed during the 7 years Okonkwo had been in exile. The church had come and led many astray. Not only the low-born and the outcast, but sometimes a worthy man had joined it. Such a man was Ogbuefi Ugonna, who had taken 2 titles, and who, like a madman, had cut the anklet of his title and cast it away to join the Christians. The white missionary was very proud of him, and he was one of the first men in Eumolpia to receive the sacred sacrament of the Holy Communion, or Holy Feast, as it was called in Ibo. Ogbuefi Ugonna had thought of the feast in terms of eating and drinking, only more holy than the village variety. He had therefore put his drinking hoard into his goatskin bag for the occasion. But apart from the church, the white men had also brought a government. They had built a court where the district commissioner judged cases of ignorance. He had court messengers who brought men to him for trial. Many of these messengers came from Umuru on the bank of the great river, where the white men first came many years before, where they had built the center of their religion and trade and government. These court messengers were greatly hated in Eumolpia because they were foreigners and also arrogant and high-handed. They were called Katma because of their ash-colored shorts, and they earned the additional name of ashy buttocks. They guarded the prison, which was full of men who had offered against the white man's law. Some of these prisoners had thrown away their twins, and some had molested the Christians. They were beaten in the prison by the Katma and made to work every morning clearing the government compound and fetching wood for the white commissioner and the court messengers. Some of these prisoners were men of title who should be above such mean occupation. They were grieved by the indignity and mourned for their neglected farms. As they cut grass in the morning, and the younger men sang in time with the strokes of their machetes. "Koma of the ash buttocks, he is fit to be a slave. The white man has no sense, he is fit to be a slave." The court messengers did not like to be called ashy buttocks, and they beat the men, but the song spread in Eumolpia. Okonkwo's head was bowed in sadness as Obairika told him these things. "Perhaps I have been away too long," Okonkwo said, almost to himself. "But I cannot understand these things you tell me. What is it that has happened to our people? Why have they lost the power to fight? Have you not heard how the white man wiped out Abame?" asked Obairika. "I have heard," said Okonkwo, "but I have also heard that Abame people were weak and foolish. Why did they not fight back? Had they no guns and machetes? We would be cowards to compare ourselves with the men of Abame. Their fathers had never dared to stand before our ancestors. We must fight these men and drive them from the land." "It is already too late," said Obairika sadly. "Our own men and sons have joined the ranks of the stranger. They have joined his religion, and they help to uphold his government. If we should try to drive out the white men in Eumolpia, we should find it easy. There are only 2 of them. But what of our own people who are following their way and have been given power? They would go to Umuru and bring the soldiers, and we would be like Abame." He paused for a long time and then said, "I told you on my last visit to Mabanta how they hanged Anito. What has happened to that piece of land in dispute? Asked Okonkwo. The white man's court has decided that it should belong to Nama's family, who had given so much money to the white man's messengers and interpreter. Does the white man understand our custom about land? How can he when he does not speak our tongue? But he says that our customs are bad, and our own brothers who had taken up his religion also say that our customs are bad. How do you think we can fight when our own brothers have turned against us? The white man is very clever. He came quietly and peaceably with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. How did they get hold of Anito to hang him? Asked Okonkwo. When he killed Oduche in the fight over the land, he fled to Aninta to escape the wrath of the earth. This was about 8 days after the fight, because Oduche had not died immediately from his wounds. It was on the 7th day that he died, but everybody knew that he was going to die, and Anito got his belongings together in readiness to flee. But the Christians had told the white man about his accident, and he sent his Katma to catch Anito. He was imprisoned with all the leaders of his family. In the end, Oduche died, and Anito was taken to the Umuru and hanged. The other people were released, but even now they have not found the mouth with which to tell of their own suffering. The two men sat in silence for a long while afterwards. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21. There were many men and women in Umofia who did not feel as strongly as Okonkwo about the new dispensation. The white man had indeed brought a lunatic religion, but he had also built a trading store, and for the first time, palm oil and kernel became things of great price, and much money flowed into Umofia. And even in the matter of religion, there was a growing feeling that there might be something in it after all, something vaguely akin to method in the overwhelming madness. This growing feeling was due to Mr. Brown, the white missionary, who was very firm in restraining his flock from provoking the wrath of the clan. One member in particular was very difficult to restrain. His name was Enoch, and his father was the priest of the snake cult. The story went around that Enoch had killed and eaten the sacred python, and his father had cursed him. Mr. Brown preached against such excess of zeal. Everything was possible, he told his energetic flock, but everything was not expedient. And so Mr. Brown came to be respected even by the clan, because he trod softly on its faith. He made friends with some of the great men of the clan, and on one of his frequent visits to the neighboring villages, he had been presented with a carved elephant tusk, which was a sign of dignity and rank. One of the great men in the village was called Akuna, and he had given one of his sons to be taught the white man's knowledge in Mr. Brown's school. Whenever Mr. Brown went into the village, he spent long hours with Akuna in Matata, in his obi talking through an interpreter about religion. Neither of them succeeded in converting the other, but they learned more about their different beliefs. You say that there is one supreme God who made heaven and earth, said Akuna on one of Mr. Brown's visits. We also believe in him and call him Chukwu. He made all the world and the other gods. There are no other gods, said Mr. Brown. Chukwu is the only god, and all others are false. You carve a piece of wood, like that one. He pointed at the rafters from which Akuna's carved Ikengwa hung. And you call it a god, but it is still a piece of wood. Yes, said Akuna Matata. It is still a piece of wood. The tree from which it came was made by Chukwu, as indeed all minor gods were. But he made them for his messengers so that he would approach them through them. It is like yourself. You are the head of your church. No, protested Mr. Brown. The head of my church is God himself. I know, said Akuna Matata, but there must be a head in this world among the men. Someone like yourself must be the head here. The head of my church is in England. That is exactly what I'm saying. The head of your church is in your country. He has sent you here as his messenger, and you have also appointed your own messengers and servants. Or let me take another example. The district commissioner, he is sent by your king. They have a queen, said the interpreter of his own account. Your queen sends her messenger, the district commissioner. He finds that he cannot do the work alone, and so he appoints Kama to help him. It is the same with God, or Chukwu. He appoints smaller gods to help him because his work is too great for one person. You should not think of him as a person, said Mr. Brown. It is because you do so that you imagine he must need helpers, and the worst thing about it is that you give all the worship to the false gods you have created. That is not so. We make sacrifices to the little gods, but when they fail, there is no one else to return to. We go to Chukwu. It is right to do so. We approach a great man through his servants, but when his servants fail to help us, then we go to his last source of hope. We appear to pay greater attention to the little gods, but that is not so. We worry them more because we are afraid to worry their master. Our fathers knew that Chukwu was the overlord, and that is why many of them gave their children to the name Chukwuka. Chukwu is supreme. You said one interesting thing, Mr. Brown, said Mr. Brown. You are afraid of Chukwu. In my religion, Chukwu is a loving father and need not be feared by those who do his will. But we fear him when we are not doing his will, said Akuna Matata. And who is to tell his will? It is too great to be known. In this way, Mr. Brown learned a good deal about the religion of the clan, and he made to the conclusion that a frontal attack on it would not succeed. And so he built a school and a little hospital in Umofia. He went from family to family, begging people to send their children to his school. But at first they only sent their slaves and sometimes their lazy children. Mr. Brown begged and argued and prophesied. He said that the leaders of the land in the future would be men and women who had learned to read and write. If Umofia failed to send her children to the school, strangers would come from other places to rule them. They could already see this happening in the native court, where the DC was already surrounded by strangers who spoke his tongue. Most of these strangers came from the distant town of Imuru on the bank of the great river where the white men first went. In the end, Mr. Brown's arguments began to have an effect. More people came to learn in his school, and he encouraged them with gifts and singlets and towels. They were not all young, these people who came to learn. Some of them were 30 years old or more. They worked on their farms in the morning and went to the school in the afternoon. And it was not long before the people began to say that the white man's medicine was quick and working. Mr. Brown's school produced quick results. A few months in it were enough to make one a court messenger or even a court clerk. Those who stayed longer became teachers, and from Umofia laborers went forth into the Lord's vineyard. New churches were established in the surrounding villages, and a few schools with them. From the very beginning, religion and education went hand in hand. Mr. Brown's mission grew from strength to strength. And because of its link with the new administration, it earned a new social prestige. But Mr. Brown himself was breaking down in health. At first, he ignored the warning signs, but in the end, he had to leave his flock sad and broken. It was in the first rainy season after Okonkwo's return to Umofia that Mr. Brown left for home. As soon as he had learned of the Okonkwo's return 5 months earlier, the missionary had immediately paid him a visit. Had he just sent Okonkwo's son, Nwoye, who was now called Isaac, to the new training college for teachers in Imuru, and he had hoped that Okonkwo would be happy to hear of it. But Okonkwo had driven him away in the threat that if he came into his compound again, he would be carried out of it. Okonkwo's return to his native land was not as memorable as he had wished. It was true his 2 beautiful daughters aroused great interest among suitors, and marriage negotiations were soon in progress. But beyond that, Umofia did not appear to have taken any special notice of the warrior's return. The clan had undergone such profound change during his exile that it was barely recognizable. The new religion and government and the trading stores were very much in the people's eyes and minds. There were still many who saw these new institutions as evil, but even they talked and thought about little else. And certainly not about Okonkwo's return. And it was a wrong year too. If Okonkwo had immediately initiated his 2 sons into the Ozo Society as he had planned, he would have caused a stir. But the initiation rite was performed in every 3 years in Umuofia, and he had to wait for nearly 2 years for the next round of ceremonies. Okonkwo was deeply grieved, and it was not just a personal grief. He mourned for the clan which he saw breaking up and falling apart, and he mourned for the warlike men in Umuofia who had so unaccountably become soft like women. End of chapter 21. This is spilling. Chapter 22. Mr. Brown's successor was the Reverend James Smith, and he was a different kind of man. He condemned openly Mr. Brown's policy of compromise and accommodation. He saw things as black and white, and black was evil. He saw the world as a battlefield in which the children of light were locked in mortal conflict with the sons of darkness. He spoke in his sermons about the sheep and goats and about wheat and tares. He believed in slaying the prophets of Baal. Mr. Smith was greatly distressed by the ignorance which many of his flock showed even in such things as the Trinity and the sacraments. It only showed that they were seeds sown on a rocky soil. Mr. Brown had thought of nothing but numbers. He should have known that our kingdom of God did not depend on large crowds. Our Lord himself stressed the importance of fewness. Narrow is the way and few is the number. To fill the Lord's holy temple with an idolatrous crowd, clamoring for sounds was a folly and this everlasting consequence. Our Lord used the whip only once in his life to drive the crowd away from his church. Within a few weeks of his arrival in Umuofia, Mr. Smith suspended a young woman from the church for pouring new wine into old bottles. This woman had allowed her hidden husband to mutilate her deaf child. The child had been declared an ogbanje, plaguing its mother by dying and entering her womb to be born again. 4 times this child had run its evil round, and so it was mutilated to discourage from it returning. Mr. Smith was filled with wrath when he heard of this. He disbelieved the story which even some of the most faithful confirmed. The story of really evil children who were not deterred by mutilation, but came back with all the scars. He replied that such stories would spread in the world by the devil to lead men astray. Those who believed such stories were unworthy of the Lord's table. There was a saying in Umuofia that as a man danced, the drums were beaten for him. Mr. Smith danced a furious step, and so the drums went mad. The overzealous converts, who had smarted under Mr. Brown's restraining hand, now flourished in full flavor. One of them was Enoch, the son of the snake priest who was believed to have killed and eaten the sacred python. Enoch's devotion to the new faith had seemed so much greater than Mr. Brown's that the villagers called him the outsider who wept louder than the bereaved. Enoch was short and slight of build, and always seemed in great haste. His feet were short and broad, and when he stood or walked, his heels came together, and his feet opened outwards, as if they had quarreled and meant to go in different directions. Such was the excessive energy bottled up in Enoch's small body that it was always erupting in quarrels and fights. On Sundays, he had always imagined that the sermon was preached for the benefit of his enemies, and if he happened to sit near one of them, he would occasionally turn to give him a meaningful look, as if to say, "I told you so." It was Enoch who touched off the great conflict between church and clan in Umuofia, which had been gathering since Mr. Brown left. It happened during the annual ceremony which was held in honor of the earth deity. At such times, the ancestors of the clan who had been committed to the Mother Earth at their death emerged again as a guru through tiny antholes. One of the greatest crimes a man could commit was to unmask an guru in public, or to say or do anything which might reduce its immortal prestige in the eyes of its uninitiated. And this was what Enoch did. The annual worship of the earth goddess fell on a Sunday, and the masked spirits were abroad. The Christian women who had been to church could not therefore go home. Some of their men had gone out to beg the Agrugu to retire for a short while for the women to pass. They agreed and were already retiring, when Enoch boasted aloud that they would not dare touch a Christian. Whereupon they all came back, and one of them gave Enoch a good stroke of the cane, which was always carried. Enoch fell on him and tore off his mask. The other Agrugu immediately surrounded their desecrated companion, to shield him from the profane gaze of the women and children, and lead him away. Enoch had killed an ancestral spirit, and Eumophia was thrown into confusion. That night the women of the spirits walked the length and breadth of the clan, weeping for her murdered son. It was a terrible night. Not even the oldest man in Eumophia had ever heard such a strange and fearful sound, and it was never to be heard again. It seemed as if its very soul of the tribe wept for a great evil that was coming, its own death. On the next day, all the masked Igugu of Umuofia assembled in the marketplace. They came from all the quarters of the clan, and even from the neighboring villages. The dreaded Otakagu came from Imo, and Akwensu, dangling a white cock, arrived from Uli. It was a terrible gathering. The eerie voices of countless spirits, the bells that clattered behind some of them, and the clash of machetes as they ran forwards and backwards and saluted one another, sent tremors of fear into every heart. For the first time in living memory, the sacred bull roar was heard in broad daylight. From the marketplace, the furious band made for Enoch's compound. Some of the elders of the clan went with him, wearing heavy protections of charms and amulets. These were men whose arms were strung in ogu, or medicine. As for the ordinary men and women, they listened from the safety of their huts. The leaders of the Christians had met together at Mr. Smith's parsonage on the previous night. As they deliberated, they could hear the mother of spirits wailing for her son. The chilling sound affected Mr. Smith, and for the first time he seemed to be afraid. What are they planning to do? He asked. No one knew, because such a thing had never happened before. Mr. Smith would have sent for the district commissioner and his court messengers, but they had gone on tour the previous day. One thing is clear, said Mr. Smith. We cannot offer physical resistance to them. Our strength lies in the Lord. They knelt down together and prayed to God for delivery. O Lord, save thy people, cried Mr. Smith. And bless thy inheritance, replied the man. They decided that Enoch should be hidden in the parsonage for a day or two. Enoch himself was greatly disappointed when he heard this, for he had hoped that a holy war was imminent, and there were a few other Christians who thought like him. But wisdom prevailed in the camp and the faithful, and many lives were thus saved. The band of Igugu moved more like a furious whirlwind to Enoch's compound, and with the machete and fire reduced it to a desolate heap. And from there they made for the church, intoxicated with this destruction. Mr. Smith was in his church when he heard the masked spirits coming. He walked quietly to the door which commanded the approach to the church compound, and stood there. But when the first 3 or 4 Igugu appeared on the church compound, he nearly bolted. He overcame this impulse, and instead of running away, he went down the 2 steps that led up to the church and walked towards the approaching spirits. They surged forward, and a long stretch of the bamboo fence with which the church compound was surrounded gave way before them. Discordant bells clanged, machetes clashed, and the air was full of dust and weird sounds. Mr. Smith heard a sound of footsteps behind him. He turned round and saw Okeke, his interpreter. Okeke had not been on the best of terms with his master since he had strongly condemned Enoch's behavior at the meeting of the church during the night. Okeke had gone as far as to say that Enoch should not be hidden in the parsonage, because he would only draw the wrath of the clan on the pastor. Mr. Smith had rebuked him in very strong language, and had not sought his advice that morning. But now, as he came up and stood by him confronting the angry spirits, Mr. Smith looked at him and smiled. It was a wan smile, but there was a deep gratitude there. For a brief moment, the onrush of the Ogugu was checked by the unexpected composure of the 2 men. But it was only a momentary check, like the tense silence between blasts of thunder. The second onrush was greater than the first. It swallowed up the two men. Then an unmistakable voice rose above the tumult, and there was an immediate silence. Space was made around the two men, and Ajophia began to speak. Ajophia was the leading Agugu of Eumophia. He was the head and spokesman of the 9 ancestors who administered justice in the clan. His voice was unmistakable, and so he was able to bring immediate peace to the agitated spirits. He then addressed Mr. Smith, and as he spoke, clouds of smoke rose from his head. "The body of the white man, I salute you," he said, using the language in which immortals spoke to men. "The body of the white man, do you know me?" he asked. Mr. Smith looked at his interpreter, but Okeke, who was a native of distant Umuru, was also at a loss. Ajophia laughed in his guttural voice. It was like the laugh of rusty metal. "They are strangers," he said, "and they are ignorant, but let them pass." He turned round to his comrades and saluted them, calling them the fathers of Eumophia. He dug his rattling spear into the ground and shook with metallic life. Then he turned once more to the missionary and his interpreter. "Tell the white man that we will not do him any harm," he said to the interpreter. "Tell him to go back to his house and leave us alone. We liked his brother who was with us before. He was foolish, but we liked him. And for his sake we shall not harm his brother. But this shrine which he built must be destroyed. We shall no longer allow in our midst. It has bred untold abominations, and we have come to put an end to it." Yet turned to his comrades. "Fathers of Eumophia, I salute you." And they replied with one guttural voice. He turned again to the missionary. "You can stay with this if you like our ways. You can worship your own God. It is good that a man should worship the gods and the spirits of his fathers. Go back to your house so that you may not be hurt. Our anger is great, but we have held it down so that we can talk to you." Mr. Smith said to his interpreter, "Tell him to go away from here. This is the house of God, and I will not live to see it desecrated." Okiki interpreted wisely to the spirits and leaders of Eumophia. "The white man says he is happy you have come to him with your grievances like friends. He will be happy if you leave the matter in his hands. We cannot leave the matter in his hands because he does not understand our customs, just as we do not understand his. We say he is foolish because he does not know our ways, and perhaps he says we are foolish because we do not know his. Let him go away." Mr. Smith stood his ground, but he could not save his church. When the Agugu went away, the red earth church with which Mr. Brown had built was a pile of earth and ashes, and for the moment, the spirit of the clan was pacified. Okay, end of chapter 22. Look at all this water I brought. Look at this. I thought I would drink this. Nope. Dude, it's not even at the marker level. Wow. Anyway. Chapter 23. For the first time in many years, Okonkwo had a feeling that was akin to happiness. The times which had altered so unaccountably during his exile seemed to be coming around again. The clan which had turned false on him appeared to be making amends. He had spoken violently to his clansmen when they had met in the marketplace to decide on their action, and they had listened to him with respect. It was like the good old days again, when a warrior was a warrior. Although they had not agreed to kill the missionary or drive away the Christians, they had agreed to do something substantial, and they had done it. Okonkwo was almost happy again. For 2 days after the destruction of the church, nothing happened. Every man in Eumophia went about armed with a gun or a machete. They would not be caught unawares like the men of Abame. Then the district commissioner returned from his tour. Mr. Smith went immediately to him, and they had a long discussion. The men of Eumofia did not take any notice of this, and if they did, they thought it was unimportant. The missionary often went to see his brother white man. There was nothing strange in that. 3 days later, the district commissioner sent his sweet-tongued messenger to the leaders of Mopia, asking them to meet him in his headquarters. That also was not strange. He often asked them to hold such palavers, as he called them. Okonkwo was among the 6 leaders he invited. Okonkwo warned the others to be fully armed. A Umofia man does not refuse a call, he said. He may refuse to do what he is asked, but he does not refuse to be asked. But the times have changed, and we must be fully prepared. And so the 6 men went to see the district commissioner armed with their machetes. They did not carry guns, for that would be unseemly. They were led into the courthouse where the district commissioner sat. He received them politely. They unslung their goatskin bags and their sheep machetes, put them on the floor, and sat down. I have asked you to come, began the commissioner, because of what happened during my absence. I have been told a few things, but I cannot believe them until I have heard from your own side. Let us talk about it like friends and find a way of ensuring that it does not happen again. Ogbuefi Ekweme rose to his feet and began to tell the story. Wait a minute, said the commissioner. I want to bring in my men so that they too can hear your grievances and take warning. Many of them come from distant places, and although they speak your tongue, they are ignorant of your customs. James, go bring in the men. His interpreter left the courtroom and soon returned with 12 men. They sat together with the men of Emofia, and Ogbuefi Ekweme began to tell the story of how the Enoch murdered Egwugwu. It happened so quickly that the 6 men did not see it coming. There was only a brief scuffle, too brief to even allow the drawing of a sheath machete. The 6 men were handcuffed and led to the guardroom. We shall not do you any harm, said the district commissioner to them later. If only you agree to cooperate with us. We have brought a peaceful administration to you and your people so that you may be happy. If any man ill-treats you, we shall come to your rescue. But we will not allow you to ill-treat others. We have a court of law where we can judge cases and administer justice, just as it is done in my own country under a great queen. I have brought you here because you joined together to molest others, to burn people's houses and burn their place of worship. That must not happen in the dominion of our queen, the most powerful ruler in the world. I have decided that you will pay a fine of 200 bags of cowries. You will be released as soon as you agree to this and undertake to collect that fine from your people. What do you say to that? The 6 men remained sullen and silent, and the commissioners left them for a while. He told the court messengers when he left the guardroom to treat the men with respect because they were the leaders of Emofia. They said, "Yes, sir," and saluted. As soon as the district commissioner left, the head messenger, who was also the prisoner's barber, took down his razor and shaved off all the hair on his men's heads. They were still handcuffed, and they just sat and moped. Who is the chief among you? The court messengers asked in jest. We see that every pauper wears the anklet of title in Eumofia. Does it cost as much as 10 cowries? The 6 men ate nothing throughout the day, and the next. They were not even given any water to drink, and they cannot go out to urinate or go to the bush when they were pressed. At night, the messengers came in to taunt them and knock their shaven heads together. Even when the men were left alone, they found no words to speak to another. It was only on the 3rd day, when they could not longer bear the hunger and the insults, that they began to talk about giving in. We should have killed the white man if he had listened to me, Okonkwo snarled. We could have been in Yumuru by now, waiting to be hanged, someone said to him. Who wants to kill the white man? Asked the messenger who had just rushed in. Nobody spoke. You are not satisfied with your crime, but you must kill the white man on top of it. He carried a strong stick, and he hit each man a few blows on the head and back. Okonkwo was choked with hate. As soon as the 6 men were locked up, court messengers went to Umofia to tell the people that their leaders would not be released unless they paid a fine of 250 bags of cowries. Unless you pay the fine immediately, said their head man, we will take your leaders to Amuru before the big white man and hang them. This story spread quickly through the villages, and it was added as it went. Some said that the men had already been taken to Amuru and would be hanged the following day. Some said that their families would also be hanged. Others said that soldiers were already on their way to shoot the people of Nofia. as they had done in Albany. It was the time of the full moon, and that night the voice of children was not heard. The, the village in Ilo, where they had always gathered for a moon play, was empty. The women of Iguedo did not meet in their secret enclosure to learn a new dance to be displayed later to the village. Young men who were always abroad in the moonlight kept their huts that night. Their manly voices were not heard on the village paths as they went to visit their friends and lovers. Eumofia was like a startled animal with ears erect, sniffing the silent, ominous air and not knowing which way to run. The silence was broken by the village crier beating his sonorous ogene. He called every man in Eumofia from the Akakanme age group upwards to a meeting in the marketplace after the morning meal. He went from one end of the village to the other and walked all its breadth. He did not leave out any of the main footpaths. Okonkwo's compound was like a deserted homestead. It was as if cold water had poured on it. His family was there, but everyone spoke in whispers. His daughter Enzima had broken her 28th day visit to the family of her future husband and returned home when she heard that her father had been imprisoned and was going to be hanged. As soon as she got home, she went to Obairika to ask what the men of Eumofia were going to do about it. But Obairika had not been home since morning. His wives thought he had been gone to a secret meeting, and Zima was satisfied that somehow something was being done. On the morning after the village criers appealed, the men of Eumofia set in the marketplace and decided to collect without delay 250 bags of calories to appease the white man. They did not know what that 50 bags would go to the court messengers who had increased the fund for that purpose. End of chapter 23. Small break. Okay. Very interesting. Everything's starting to come together. Chapter 24. Okonkwo and his fellow prisoners were set free as soon as the fine was paid. The district commissioner spoke to them again about the great queen and about peace and good government. But the men did not listen. They just sat and looked at him and at his interpreter. In the end, they were given back their bags and sheep and machetes and told to go home. They arose and left the courthouse. They neither spoke to anyone nor amongst themselves. The courthouse, like the church, was built a little way outside the village. The footpath that linked them was a very busy one because it also led to the stream beyond the court. It was open and sandy. Footpaths were open and sandy in the dry season, but when the rains came in, the bush grew thick on either side and closed in on the path. It was now dry season. As they made their way into the village, the 6 men met women and children going to the stream with their water pots. But the men wore such heavy and fearsome looks that the women and children did not say no or welcome to them, but edged out of the way to let them pass. In the village little groups, men joined them until they became a sizable company. They walked silently. Each of the 6 men got to his compound. He turned in, taking some of the crowd with him. The village was astir in a silent, suppressed way. And Zima had prepared some food for her father as soon as the news spread that the 6 men would soon be released. She took it to him in his obi. He ate absent-mindedly. He had no appetite. He only ate to please her. His male relations and his friends had gathered in his obi, and Obairika was urging him to eat. Nobody else spoke, but they noticed the long stripes on Okonkwo's back where the warder's whip had cut into his flesh. The village crier was abroad again in the night. He beat his iron gong and announced that another meeting would be held in the morning. Everyone knew that Eumolpia was at last going to speak its mind about the things that were happening. Okonkwo slept early, very little that night. The bitterness in his heart was now mixed with a kind of childlike excitement. Before he had gone to bed, he brought down his war dress, which he had not touched since his return from exile. He had shaken out his smoked raffia skirt and examined his tall feather headgear and his shield. They were all satisfactory, he had thought. As he lay on the bamboo bed, he thought about the treatment he had received in the white man's court, and he swore vengeance. If Eumolpia decided on war, it would all be well. All would be well. But if they chose to be cowards, he would go out and avenge himself. He thought about wars in the past. The noblest, he thought, was the war against Isaac. In those days, Ukodu was still alive. Ukudo sang a war song in a way that no other man could. He was not a fighter, but his voice turned every man into a lion. Worthy men are no more, Okonkwo sighed as he remembered those days. Isaac will never forget how we slaughtered them in that war. We killed 12 of their men, and they killed only 2 of ours. Before the end of the 4th market week, they were suing for peace. Those were days where men were men. As he thought of these things, he heard the sound of the iron gong in the distance. He listened carefully and could just hear the crier's voice, but it was very faint. He turned on his bed and his back hurt him. He ground his teeth. The crier was drawing nearer and nearer until he passed by Okonkwo's compound. The greatest obstacle in Eumolpia, Okonkwo thought bitterly, is that coward, Egonwan. His sweet tongue can change fire into cold ash. When he speaks, he moves our men into impotence. If they had ignored his womanish wisdom 5 years ago, we would not have come to this. He ground his teeth. Tomorrow we will tell him that our fathers never fought a war of blame. If they listen to him, I shall leave them and plan my own revenge. The crier's voice had once more become faint, and the distance had been the harsh edge off his iron gong. Okonkwo turned from one side to the other and derived a kind of pleasure from his pain his back gave him. Let Egonwan talk about a war of blame tomorrow, and I shall show him my back and head. He ground his teeth. The marketplace began to fill as soon as the sun rose. Obairika was waiting in his obi when the Okonkwo came along and called him. He hung his goatskin bag and his sheath machete on his shoulder and went out to join him. Obairika's hut was close to the road, and he saw every man who passed to the marketplace. He had exchanged greetings with many who had already passed that morning. When Okonkwo and Obairika got to the meeting place, there were already so many people that if one threw up a grain of sand, it would not find its way to the earth again, and many more people were coming from every quarter of the 9 villages. It warmed Okonkwo's heart to see such strength of numbers, but he was looking for one man in particular, the man whose tongue he dreaded and despised so much. Can you see him? He asked Obairika. Who? Egonwan, he said, his eyes roving from one corner of the huge marketplace to the other. Most of the men sat on their wooden stools and they had brought with them. No, Obairika, casting his eyes over the crowd. Yes, there he is, under the silk cotton tree. Are you afraid he would convince us not to fight? Afraid? I do not care what he does to you. I despise him and those who listen to him. I shall fight alone if I choose. They spoke at the top of their voices because everybody was talking, and it was like the sound of a great market. I shall wait till he has spoken, Okonkwo thought. Then I shall speak. But how do you know he will speak against war? Obairika asked after a while. Because I know he is a coward, said Okonkwo. Obairika did not hear the rest of what he said, because at the moment someone touched his shoulder from behind, and he turned around to shake hands and exchange greetings with 5 or 6 friends. Okonkwo did not turn around, even though he knew the voices. He was in no mood to exchange greetings. But one of the men touched him and asked about the people of his compound. They are very well, he replied without interest. The first man to speak to Eumolpia that morning was Okaika, one of the 6 who had been imprisoned. Okaika was a great man and an orator, but he did not have the booming voice which a first speaker must use to establish silence in the assembly of the clan. Onyeka had such a voice, and so he was asked to salute Eumolpia before Okaika began to speak. Eumolpia Kwenu, he bellowed, raising his left arm and pushing the air with his open hand. Yah! Roared Eumolpia. Eumolpia Kwenu! He bellowed again and again and again, facing a new direction this time, and the crowd answered, Yah! There was an immediate silence as though the cold water had been pouring on a roaring flame. Okaika sprang to his feet and also saluted his clansmen 4 times. Then he began to speak. You all know why we are here, when we ought to be building our barns and mending our huts, when we should be putting our compounds in order. My father used to say to me, whenever you see a toad jumping in broad daylight, then know that something is after its life. When I saw you all pouring into this meeting from all the quarters of our clan so early in the morning, I knew that something was after our life. He paused for a moment, brief moment, and then began again. All our gods are weeping. Idemili is weeping, Ogugu is weeping, Abala is weeping, and all the others. Our dead fathers are weeping because of the shameful sacrilege they are suffering, and the abomination we have all seen with our own eyes. He stopped again to steady his trembling voice. This is a great gathering. No clan can boast of greater numbers or greater valor. But are we all here? I ask you, are the sons of Eumolpia here with us here? A deep murmur swept throughout the crowd. They are not, he said. They have broken the clan and gone their several ways. We who are here this morning have remained true to our fathers, but our brothers have deserted us and joined a stranger to soil their fatherland. If we fight the stranger, we shall hit our brothers and perhaps shed the blood of our clansmen. But we must do it. Our fathers never dreamed of such a thing. They never killed our brothers, but a white man never came to them. So we must do what our fathers would never have done. Anik the bird was asked why he was always on the wing, and he replied, Men have learned to shoot without missing their mark, and I have learned to fly without perching on a twig. We must root out this evil. And if our brothers must take the side of evil, we must root them out too. And we must do it now. We must bail this water now, and that it is only ankle deep. At this point, there was a sudden stir in the crowd, and every eye was turned in one direction. There was a sharp bend in the road that led from one marketplace to the white man's court, and to the stream beyond it. And so no one had seen the approach of five court messengers until they had come round the bend, a few paces from the edge of the crowd. Okonkwo was sitting at the edge. He sprang to his feet as soon as he saw who it was. He confronted the head messenger, trembling with hate, unable to utter a word. The man was fearless and stood his ground. His 4 men lined up behind him. In that brief moment, the world seemed to stand still, waiting. There was utter silence. The men of Eumolpia were merged into the mute backcloths of trees and giant creepers, waiting. The spell was broken by a head messenger. Let me pass, he ordered. What do you want here? The white man whose power you know too well has ordered this meeting into tumulus life, and the meeting was stopped. Okonkwo stood looking at the dead man. He knew that Eumolpia would not go to war. He knew because they had led the other messengers escape. They had broken it into tumult instead of action. He discerned fright in that tumult. He heard voices asking, why did you do it? He whacked his machete on the sand and went away. End of chapter 24. Shots fired. Wow, we are at the last chapter. This one's hard. Chapter 25. When the district commissioner arrived at Okonkwo's compound at the head of an armed band of soldiers and court messengers, he found a small crowd of men sitting warily in the obi. He commanded them to come outside, and they obeyed without a murmur. Which among you is called Okonkwo? He asked through his interpreter. He is not here, replied Obirika. Where is he? He is not here. The commissioner became angry and red in the face. He warned the men that unless they produced Okonkwo's forthwith, he would lock them all up. The men murmured among themselves, and Obirika spoke up again. We can take you where he is, and perhaps your men will help us. The commissioner did not understand what Obirika meant when he said that. Perhaps your men will help us. One of the most infuriating habits of these people was their love of superfluous words, he thought. Obirika, with 5 or 6 others, led the way. The commissioner and his men followed their firearms held at the ready. He had warned Obirika that if he and his men played any monkey tricks, they would be shot. And so they went. There was a small bush behind Okonkwo's compound. The only opening into the bush from the compound was a little round hole in the red earth wall through which fowls went in and out in their endless search for food. The hole would not let men through. It was to this bush that Obirika led the commissioner and his men. They skirted around the compound, keeping close to the wall. The only sound they made was with their feet as they crushed the dry leaves. Then they came to the tree from which Okonkwo's body was dangling, and they stopped dead. Perhaps your men can help us bring him down and bury him, said Obirika. We have sent for strangers from another village to do it for us, but they may be a long time coming. The district commissioner changed instantaneously. The resolute administrator in him gave way to the student of primitive customs. Why can't you take him down yourselves? He asked. It is against your custom, said one of the men. It is an abomination for a man to take his own life. It is an offense against the earth, and the man who commits it will not be buried by his clansmen. His body is evil, and only strangers may touch it. That is why we asked your people to bring him down, because you are strangers. Will you bury him like any other man? Asked the commissioner. We cannot bury him, only strangers can. We shall pay your men to do it. When he has been buried, we will then do our duty by him. We shall make sacrifices to cleanse the desecrated land. Obirika, who had been gazing steadily at his friend's dangly body, turned suddenly to the district commissioner and said ferociously, That man was one of the greatest men in Umofia. You drove him to kill himself, and now he will be buried like a dog. He could say no more. His voice trembled and choked his words. Shut up, shouted one of his messengers, quite unnecessarily. Take down the body, the commissioner ordered his chief messenger, and bring it and all the people to the court. Yes, sir, the messenger said, saluting. The commissioner went away, taking 3 or 4 of the soldiers with him. In the many years in which he had toiled to bring civilization to different parts of Africa, he had learned a number of things. One of them was that a district commissioner must never attend to such undignified details as cutting a hanged man from the tree. Such attention would give the natives a poor opinion of him. In the book which he planned to write, he was stressed that point. As he walked back to the court, he thought about that book. Every day brought him some new material. The story of this man who had killed a messenger and hanged himself would make an interesting reading. One could almost write a whole chapter on him. Perhaps not a whole chapter, but a reasonable paragraph. At any rate, there was so much else to include, and one must be firm in cutting out details. He had already chosen the title of the book. After much thought, The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. End of chapter 25. End of part 3. End of Things Fall Apart. Cool. Very interesting book. This part took less than I thought. So that's it. That's the last book I ever have to read in high school. Wow. It's crazy. Yep. Also, my first time attempting to read a whole book out loud. Done in 2 parts. That's not bad. Yeah, thanks for watching. See you all guys.